Yeah, I guess that would.
whatever you think.
Which would be easier for you?
Is it okay if the beat is here or that clarity not enough?
Um,
Oh, yeah.
no, if yeah, maybe this is easiest. Welcome. We'll get started. If I can have your attention, please. Just a reminder, we'll have one of our last course dinners today. The assignment about Howard Zinn's work provoked lively discussions of how we see our own social class situations, and there will be an opportunity to continue discussion of that theme at today's course dinner. That's 6 to 7 in the Leverett House private dining room. We also have a special invitation to those thinking of writing senior theses related to personal choice and global transformation themes. There'll be opportunity for discussion of ideas and resources for that also at today's dinner. On Friday, our last interview, we will be interviewing Amy Goodman, the host of the Democracy Now! Radio program. She's famous as a very brave journalist who, in reporting on a massacre in East Timor, for example, was beaten up by soldiers as she attempted to get the truth out of what was going on. It's a great pleasure at this point to introduce the professor who, when I was a Harvard undergraduate, influenced the course of my own thinking and my own life more than any other. We have all read the Call of Service, and as well as an article about Dr. Coles, so I'll keep this short, except to say that for me and for many of you who were fortunate in your first year, if you're seniors now, to take a course with Dr. Coles, he's someone who has changed the lives of more Harvard students than perhaps anyone. In addition to being a great teacher and Pulitzer Prize winning and prolific author, he's the editor of Double Take magazine. And if you don't know Double Take, I urge you to take a look at it. It's in the libraries such as Lamont, a magazine that deals with literary and social questions from a very humanistic, large-hearted perspective that one finds in very few other places. Please join me in welcoming Professor Robert Coles.
To be back here, I haven't been in this room for some time, having taught here for a number of years. I'll be glad to do whatever you want. I mean, I'll respond to whatever question.
Maybe I'll give you this one.
What?
I think the one that I have is maybe better.
Yeah. Is this better? Is this better? Yeah. Please, I may need, if you had trouble hearing me, I'm sure I'm going to have trouble hearing you, but somehow we'll work out whatever it is. I'd be glad to take any questions or respond to any inquiries any of you may have.
If you have the microphone fairly in this way, that's best.
Hold it this way.
Maybe this one's better.
This reminds me of what I go through with my grandchildren, and believe me, it's always difficult to master technology these days. Pluses and minuses, benefits, but I remember being a student here in Emerson Hall when there were these gadgets, and the professor got a little hoarse, raising his voice, and we knew that he meant it by the look on his face and whatever, but have all this jazz. And in any event, we got to know him, and we took his measure then in our own non-technological way. I couldn't help but notice the words personal choice. But if that isn't a subject that'll keep us going for the rest of our lives, I don't know what will. Personal choice and how it comes about and how we exert it, against what odds, trying to do what, and sometimes paying what price. I hear myself getting rhetorical, and what I'd like now is for any questions that any of you have.
The first question is from Rachel Becker. Where is Rachel?
Thank you for coming, Dr. Coles. Here at Harvard, many of us are drawn to the important fields of medicine, law, and banking. You are a doctor, but at a young age decided to expand your work and not pursue more achievements in that respected field. My question for you is, what inspired you to do the important work that you've done?
Can I read that, please?
Sure.
Very well punctuated. You're asking about medicine as against some of the other fields, right? I wish I could say that, what, go ahead.
If you have the microphone pretty close.
I wish I could say that medicine was maybe a little bit as disconnected as I think you're implying. It's a big business now. There are some of us who remember the days when it wasn't such. Now it's tied up with the government. It's tied up with companies. It's tied up with corporate life. And believe me, it's tied up with a lot of dough. And I think anyone going into medicine, he or she ought to stop and think about all these matters. I know some people who have left the medical profession because they can't stand the bureaucratic stuff that every day is imposed on them. They just walked away from it. I know one physician who has become a school teacher, an elementary school teacher. It's quite an astonishing career trajectory, as some of you know, who have unfortunately had to take organic chemistry, which almost destroyed some of us here, right over there in that chemistry lab not too far from this building. But it's tough. It's tough how our life has become tied up with these very forces you're getting at. And all I can say is one keeps trying and struggling, and each of us has our own particular way. I get dozens of requests through letters, through faxes, through emails, which have bureaucratic implications to them. Former students, people I know, and on it goes. And you have to take a deep breath with some of that stuff and ask yourself, how far can I go humanly? But we find our ways, I hope. Life finds its way sometimes for us. When I was in medical school, I'm embarrassed to tell you this. When I was in medical school, there was exactly one woman in our class. This is not the Civil War that we're going back to. We're going back, let's face it, 40, 50 years. That's not a long time, but that's what I remember. Just as I remember also that there was one and then a second African American in the whole class. No Spanish-speaking students. So the world changes. That was the title of a soap opera a number of years ago, and it does. Anyway, long-winded response, but thank you for that. Next.
And now we have Anna Portnoy.
Thank you. In your book, The Call to Service, you talk about how your ideas of service were shaped by people like Tessie, who saw her role in initiating school desegregation as a way to help God out, to lead an important effort designated by God. You also mentioned the influence of other religious people on your life, Dorothy Day, Leo Tolstoy, your mother. I'm wondering if you could talk more directly about the role religion has played in your own life. In your own troubled times, have you turned to religion as a source of guidance? And has your own religious faith helped you to live a life of service? And if so, how?
Do you want to repeat what religion?
The role of religion. I can't understand why you would ask that question. When I was in medical school at Columbia's College of Physicians and Surgeons, P&S as we got to call it, the medical center up there near the George Washington Bridge, boy, does it tower, and the buildings get taller and taller. But when I was a medical student, I had a lot of trouble figuring out why I'd come there and why I wanted to remain there. The same trouble I had when I was a student here, taking organic chemistry and then going over to the biolabs, as we called them, not to mention the physics labs, which aren't too far from here. Just before this time together began, I took a little walk and I renewed my acquaintance with those buildings, and I remembered my mood as I walked out of them. Boy, do I remember it every time I see them. I wanted to be an English major and let it go at that. I made the mistake, quotes, unquote, of having a wonderful tutor who suggested that I write my thesis on William Carlos Williams, whom some of you, I hope and pray, know about. An American physician and writer. When I finished the thesis, it had to get through the English department, which at that time had no use for him. Boy, that would be a study for all of us. Who does Harvard like, when, and why? By Harvard, I mean the big shot professors and the people who control the damn place. So, having run into that kind of difficulty, Professor Perry Miller, who actually is the person who ultimately got the history and lit department going at Harvard, he turned to me and he said, "Send what you've written to Dr. Williams." Well, I didn't know how to do that, and I told him I couldn't do it. He said, "You don't have the postage." I said, "I think I could get the postage." I sent it off and I got a reply from Dr. Williams, and he told me to drop by and see him. I eventually did meet him in New Jersey, and out of this is a long-winded way of getting to answer that question about science and medical school and whatever, and religion, because I will never forget Williams telling me when I was in medical school, try to find some way of finding something to believe in apart from the studying you're doing. Because the studying is going to pull you more and more into yourself and away from others. An interesting observation for a busy country or city, in his case, city doc. Well, I tried to listen to him, and then I had a suggestion that came to me from my mother. Now, the answer to the question about the role of religion. I grew up hearing my mother talk about someone named Dorothy Day. She had carried on a correspondence with Dorothy Day, not because my mother was some big shot of any kind, but because she used to send checks to the Catholic Worker in New York on 36 East 1st Street. I remember the checks going out. My father was a scientist. He was an engineer who went to MIT and had no great interest, believe me, in religion. Only in the science become religion I began eventually to realize. Science could solve all problems. MIT's science, maybe some science here at Harvard. Nobel science, that would solve our problems. The problem for my father came, by the way, in the 1930s. He had gone to Germany to study further science. And then what happened? The nation on this planet that had the highest per capita educational level in terms of high school, gymnasium, it was called there, and college, was Germany. Boy, do we all need to know that. The best educated nation on this planet by 1933 had become the nation headed by Adolf Hitler. The next time someone tells you education will solve our problems, a little skepticism on our part, historically informed, ought to say, oh yeah? And then there is religion. I'm coming to the religion part. The nation of Catholicism and Lutheranism, of course, Lutheranism from Germany, had the highest per capita rate of church attendance. Leave it to the statisticians and the population scientists and the sociologists, but those are the facts. What do we do with the fact that people can be church devoted, equals, quote, religious, unquote, if you want to say that? We could have a whole hour debating that one. But church attending and very well educated. How do you mingle that with Hitler and concentration camps? And what do we do with this? These are the kinds of matters that Dorothy Day, in her own way, brought up for some who were interested in pondering these matters. And this is what my mother would say to my father when he talked about science. My mother would bring in religion, not church attendance, but that Dorothy Day spirit, which for her was a continuation of the storytelling of the Hebrew prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos, and then of Jesus of Nazareth. Storytellers, morally awake, concerned about spiritual matters, you bet. The role of religion in one's life, I hope we all ask ourselves this when we ask ourselves, what do we believe in? And what matters to us? And what, in the last analysis, would we stand up and give ourselves for body, mind, and soul, so to speak, to use a religious term? The role of religion, I guess, goes from people as agnostic as Williams, who nevertheless insisted on belief and connection, and then going down there and meeting Dorothy Day, reading her letters at the hands of my mother, who would, and then actually when I once wrote home and I told my mother I was going to leave medical school, I was fed up with it. And she wrote back and she said, please, if you leave medical school, go down and see Dorothy Day and talk to her, which I did. And without any psychological palaver or religious importuning or whatever, or insisting, she just said, you're lucky to be able to have the chance somehow to connect with people who are ailing. And I remember that word ailing coming from her and thinking, wow, that's what I'm doing or hope to do. And it was a very important, a religiously connected word almost that I had right now. Anyway, thank you. Another one?
Anthony Lascalzo.
Hey, Doc. How are you? As you know, a few years ago, Ruby Bridges, your friend, told me that she believed that you were the vessel, as she put it, that kept her story alive. I know how important stories are to you, so on behalf of the students in the class, I want to ask you, what do you believe is the role of stories and literature in personal and social change?
Well, Anthony, I think that the role of stories, I think stories get at the heart of who we are. I think I've already said, in a sense, we're the storytelling creature. The only creature whom fate, chance, circumstance, the Lord, however you want to put it, whatever word you want to use, the only creature who uses language. If you want to say neurobiologically, we're the creature of language through our neurobiological inheritance and capability. In fact, the insistence of the brain on language. I speak now as a father and a grandfather. I mean, you watch your children and grandchildren becoming talkative. They acquire words. You all know this from your own experience. They acquire words and they use them. And then they put them together. We do. And out of that comes our storytelling nature. Like, oh, I had to give a lecture at so-and-so time, and I parked my car. Or I had to come to a meeting of a class at 3 o'clock this afternoon. So I left the house early because I knew I had to find a parking space. And actually yesterday I was at the same place and I got a ticket. And I saw the policeman giving me the ticket and I tried to go up to persuade him not to do it, but he'd already written the ticket out. And then he told me, too late. There's a story. Too late for me, but not for him, because he knew that the more tickets he gets, the better it is for him. By the way, I told my class this a few years ago because I had a similar experience when a policeman explained to me, like a good teacher, that there was a quota, that if he came back with no tickets, this ain't so good. At that point, I felt like saying the typical liberal philanthropist, give me 10 tickets. That'll help. Anyway, I tell you, I got here, I parked my car, the meter wasn't working, and I got furious. The damn meter, I'm pouring money into it, and it isn't going up. Well, I won't use the language that crossed my mind about paying me for a word. That's a story that I'm telling you. A story that happened to me today. And it's a story that's in my mind. Now, if I go home and speak to my son, who lives nearby, and tell him, he'll say, how did it go today? I'll tell him a story. Isn't that what you and I do every day of our lives? Using language, we mobilize our thoughts and convey them to others and thereby connect with others. And this is our story as human beings, with words pulled into the service of human self-knowledge and then human togetherness. The story, our essence, which is what happens, I assume, in this room every day. And of course, when you go back to rooms, oh, we went to that lecture, he was out of his mind. Or this guy, I'm so sick of it, but I need to get an A. And they come a little easier in his course, whatever. Next. Next question. Whatever.
Can people in the back hear all right? I guess as much as the microphone can be close.
I need to hold it closer.
Yeah.
It's
bad technology. Yeah. Sarah Samuels. Sarah.
Thanks so much for being here. In chapter 4 of the Call of Service, titled Hazards, you speak of people who have become... Okay.
an encounter.
Okay, thanks for being here. In chapter 4 of the Call of Service, titled Hazards, you speak of people who have become weary by the emotionally draining work that they do. You quote one woman who says, "People being pushed around a lot begin to wear down, even if they're winning some of the battles they're fighting. In my service work, some of my biggest obstacles have been in overcoming my own exhaustion and weariness." What advice or insight can you offer to people trying to fight personal exhaustion so that they may do work that they believe to be important, and what ways have you yourself overcome weariness?
I think I could get a bestseller out of that with a how-to book. How to overcome exhaustion, weariness, and 25 other things, and live happily ever after. But I see what you're asking, and it's a very important matter. Namely, what do we do about social struggle and weariness, or personal insistence and exertion and weariness, which you know about in a place like this. This place, among other things, this institution is not unable to prompt weariness in people, along with a few other emotions: annoyance, disgust, fed up, anger, you name it. It's a struggle. Actually, I'll go back to Dorothy Day. I'm a psychoanalyst, and I guess I believe in free association, as Freud reminded us to, but I will tell you, I remember Dorothy Day. Boy, she worked hard. It is not easy work to run a soup kitchen, by the way, when people are coming in who are really out of it. Many of them overcome by various kinds of addiction. Many of them weary themselves and therefore wearying to others who work with them or try to connect with them, communicate with them, and whatever. What does one do in this regard? How does one stand tall and firm with some energy and yet feel at times exhausted and wondering? I go back again to I'm sorry to keep doing this, to the organic chemistry lab. We would come out of some of those experiments. I still remember them. In this very room, I would talk about preparing triphenylcarbinol. Imagine at my age that I still remember doing that. At your age, triphenylcarbinol. I used to say to myself, who cares about triphenylcarbinol? But the section person did, and the professor did, and the registrar did, and my parents did. Oh, God. Literally. But anyway, I'd shake my head in exhaustion and weariness, and I'd wonder, how do you get out of this? Why? Well, I thought to myself, I want to get out of it and somehow get through it and maybe even get on to something else. Little did I know that then it'll be the same story until we're finally free, as Dr. King said, free, free at last. And he knew, some of us who knew him, there was a side to him that was so beautiful and heartbreaking that when he was exhorting people in connection with civil rights, he knew that there was a larger story, our human rights, and how we treat one another, including in an institution like this, where you may have noticed that distinction, even power, are not incompatible with rudeness, arrogance, smugness, and self-importance. What do you do with that when the bosses themselves are like this and you're here? I guess what you do is you think of Dorothy Day, you think of people you know and admire, and you ultimately fall back on your own self-respect. Boy, that's a tough assignment, in which you say, my God, no matter what I hear and read about in the Crimson or whatever, that so-and-so said who's a big shot or whatever, I can have some sense of what really matters, whether even if it isn't graded and it isn't written down on something called a term paper. It's in my damn head, and I will fall back on that and hold to that with every ounce of energy I have. I guess a roundabout way of responding to what you were bringing up with that question. Another?
Peter Wallach. Peter? Caitlin Ferreter.
Go ahead.
Don't mind if I do. Okay. Your book, The Call of Service, discusses the tensions between the rhetoric and reality of service endeavors. These tensions are rooted in the fact that volunteers are often outsiders to the problems of those they seek to help, and therefore usually approach service from an ideological, if not idealistic, perspective. How can we as students use our access to academics and our understanding of rhetoric productively in our service activities? How can we draw on our privilege in a way that creates stronger connections rather than barriers with those whom we are helping?
That's a great and very important question, especially when you talk about ideology and theory and how they inform our thinking and so often get in our way. Well, I'm loading it up, by the way. I say get in our way. Look, you know, Paul Tillich, when I was a student here, Paul Tillich, the theologian who used to teach, who before had taught at Union Theological Seminary, was brought up here to teach by President Bach, I think it was. This was a very important moment to bring a distinguished theologian to talk with Harvard undergraduates, not in the religion school, not in the divinity school, that is, but to college students. I took his course. Boy, do I remember it. He was tough to follow sometimes. He had a bit of an abstract mind. But I also vividly recall one day when he pulled the whole thing down on himself and us. And he said, I've been talking about theory, and I want to get myself with you here in this room, just putting it that way was a big shock for us. No teacher had ever done it that way. This is a little existentialism entering the classroom. But he said, I want to do it in such a way that we are human beings and we're talking about our humanity. Now, service is what? Service is people meeting other people. But if service is one person helping another person, believe me, it's the helper being helped. And if we can't figure that out, including the moments when working with others helps us get rid of a lot of fancy sociological abstractions and social science abstractions and God knows how many others that keep us in highfalutin language. If we can't go from there to one another, then I wonder what the word service is about. I remember as a student here working for PBH, I used to tell my class this every year. I remember doing some tutoring. It was hard. And one day, the young man, it was in the old North End, talk about what's happened. The North End, as we all know, historically has been gentrified, but there was a time when the North End was a working class neighborhood in Boston. And this young man, I was trying to help him with his English and his math. The math was as hard for me as it was for him, and I thought, how the devil did I get into this? It's like the blind leading the blind, but I thought I'll work hard at it, and somehow the two of us, one day he spotted me on that. He said, I think you're getting better at your math. Well, I still remember that, and I thought to myself, oh boy, this ain't so bad to work with someone else and maybe learn a little bit of math. Then we got into some of the storytelling English part of it, and he was telling me about his life. And one day he turned the tables again on me and he said, do you like going back there? Where would you like to be? I said, well, it depends what time you're talking about. But we had a talk that I still remember. Two human beings, how did Martin Buber put it? I, thou. And I think, I hope and pray that for each of us, service has to do with some kind of recognition of another, maybe recognition of ourselves through another. And if it gets into a lot of other stuff, which it unfortunately does sometime, with a lot of talk about politics and social this and class that and this and that, I don't know. Let's keep that stuff in the classroom. Let's keep service connected to ourselves and our fellow human beings in a human way with the struggles. I'm not saying we don't use our minds, but there are times when a lot of this heavy thinking can yield to a kind of human heaviness of heart and soul. I guess that would be the way I'd respond to that really important question, because I know, there's been a lot of talk about connecting service to the curriculum. I understand that. I understand the values of it. But I hope that service, here I'm going to come out as a real crusty old character. I hope that service ultimately will be part of our lives affirmed here. And I worry that if we start getting faculty committees on this, and if we start, God forbid, even getting papers in on it, graded, Lord spare us. Anyway, next.
Adam Turner, sorry.
Yeah. there so that my failing hearing will somehow... Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Coles. You sort of actually just led into what my question was going to be, which is, do you see a necessary trade-off between everyday service and working for political change?
Do I see a necessary connection between everyday service and working for political change? That's a tough one. You know what I think? If I do think at all, and you may have your doubts now, but what I think is that working for political change, I hope and pray, has to do with service. Because I think we hope and pray that people in politics, in one way or another, are going to influence the lives of other people. They're going to push for this kind of legislation or that. They're going to exhort, as you may have noticed politicians do. They're going to exhort, insist, criticize, comment, observe. And so politics willy-nilly has to do with that aspect of human connection, namely, here is a person in politics or people in politics who are trying to figure out what will work. Now, you and I know one of the things they're trying to figure out is it going to work for them? Will they get elected or re-elected? But let's not be too hard on our politicians. If we're going to go after people who are self-serving because they want to get elected and live in the White House or the state capitol or whatever, let's go after some people who are also self-serving because they want to be a professor here, for instance. That has happened, where egoism is a part of one's life, or they want to be in a law firm, or they want to work in a hospital, and they connect work with politely, even in a friendly way, with ambition. If you want to be skeptical, it's work connected to it's self-serving work. That's a moral judgment, obviously loaded into the words self-serving. But I think, God, I don't know, I think that we have to try and be as generous as we can with one another and hope that somehow, as we struggle to do what we're doing, that there is a good and positive side to that. Now, how you do this in such a way that you recommend it without giving people a step-by-step, well, you do this, you do that, X, Y, and Z. That's what I was meaning about these various self-help books. Let us not fall back on agendas and detailed pronouncements. Let us, again, embrace human possibility. By the way, accidents, luck, good luck and bad luck. That's a big part of our lives. As you may have noticed in connection with your own lives, your lives came about not because they were programmed by some chart that says, this is what you do and that's what you do, which your mothers and fathers followed and memorized and got A's in. Your parents met one another. They fell in love. They married. They slept with one another, and here you are. And we're not going to program that, I hope, although I wouldn't put it past 25 million people thinking they can get a good book contract out of that one. How to get into Harvard. How to choose your parents. Oh, boy. Well, that is before you're born. We're getting into religion here, I think. But I'm being a little absurd because some of this, I'm afraid, borders on that. I think you know what I'm trying to say. I'll take another question.
Ryan McKnight.
Oh. Deaf, dumb, and blind. Okay. Yes, sir.
When you interviewed Ruby Bridges, you used a very analytical approach that you learned in the classroom and in your education. Unfortunately, using this method kept you from understanding the simple message she was trying to say. So if you could go back and unlearn anything from your education, what would you unlearn?
Well, you're bringing up Ruby again, and you notice I'm wandering from Ruby, my previous question, but look, the story of Ruby Bridges and me is a story, I'll say it a little bit and with embarrassment, it's the story of an eager, interested, ambitious researcher, God forbid, but that's what I was. I wanted to learn something. I was a doctor, and by then I had learned an unfortunate lesson in a way that if you ask children questions, they'll give you answers. What a nerve. In a way, that's what Ruby was puzzled by. And her parents, although they were wonderfully polite people. But, you know, here this white character comes around, and we have to go back to 1960 when it was against the law, believe it or not, against the law for me to go into Ruby's home. That's what America had back then. Oh, even to contemplate that is probably hard for you to do, but believe me, it was the law. Well, they were gracious people, and they received my wife and me. And they, in a way, allowed me slowly with my drawing. My mother was an artist. I've always been interested in drawing, and thank God for that, because at least I didn't start him with a barrage of talk at first, other than to tell him I was interested in drawing and Ruby drawing. But there is no question that Ruby had about her a kind of simplicity and, in the best sense of the word, innocence that I didn't have. I wanted to know. She wanted to be kindly. She wanted to comply, not in the bad sense of the word comply. She was getting along with me. But I slowly began to realize that there was a great deal of dignity about this young lady that I thought I needed to learn. I don't know whether, let me just tell you a moment between Ruby and me when I told her that I'd been asking a lot of questions, and I thought I had another question to ask her because she was doing a lot of praying, and I knew that, and her parents told me. And I said, Ruby, you're doing a lot of praying for these people. These are the people who were heckling her and wanted to, frankly, some of them would have killed her if they'd had an opportunity. That's how horrible it was. I thought, I'm a child psychiatrist, originally a pediatrician. I know how to talk with children. I had observed this, and I thought it would help both her and me if I pointed out to her that she seemed to be doing a lot of praying for these people, and that I knew that there must be some anger and annoyance in her. After all, look at the way they were treating her. They were calling her names. Federal marshals had to get her past them. So here is my mind as a scientist, quotes around the word probably, saying to Ruby, let me, by implication, help you. Let's talk about your other feelings about these people whom you're praying for. And it comes to a final moment. I said, Ruby, you're doing so much praying for them. And I wonder whether that isn't a lot of praying, and I wonder if you have some other feelings. Oh, there's the clinician. And what did she say to me? She looked at me and quizzically she said, well, don't you think they need praying for? Don't you think they need praying for? My heart sank. First of all, I realized there's a kind of crudeness in my manner that she had done an end run around. And what she basically, in a way, she was saying to me, I think I ought to pray for you, too. Because people, I believe that they're, as Jesus told us, as the Hebrew prophets before us told us, they're forsaken and they need forgiveness and prayer. And you maybe need a little bit of it too. She wouldn't put it that way. Here we get the encounter, if I may say so, the Bible